So, welcome here to the monastery at the end of the world. Here I am on Barramadigal land. So, I'd like to start off by acknowledging the Barramadigal people of the Darug Nation and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And I'd also like to extend that respect to any First Nations people who are joining us today and First Nations people everywhere. So thank you very much for that introduction, Bronwyn, and thank you to the Buddhist Library for inviting me to be here with you all tonight. So the topic, as Bronwyn mentioned, is from sad to glad. And in the blurb that I sent a long time ago now, I mentioned the topic of ethics, and ethics, especially in regards to speech, bodily actions, and thoughts. So ethics is one of the foundational aspects of Buddhism, but often in the West especially, it's something that's not very frequently taught. When we think about mindfulness or meditation that's taught in community, we don't often hear about ethics. And this is a real shame, actually. It means that we come at the Buddhist path at a certain point, which we might think is maybe the best point for us to start. Meditation, it seems like that's what Buddhism is, yeah? That's what Buddhism is for. We meditate, and that's something that can transform our mind. That's something that's going to help us. And this is true. But actually, when the Buddha taught, he never started off with meditation. He always started off with ethics, ethical conduct. And in Buddhism, we call that sila. So to begin with, I'd like to share an image with you, which is a mental image. I don't have my screen sharing on. So it's a mental image, and you can kind of close your eyes if you want and picture this. So it's the image of a field. And in the field, there is a farmer. And the farmer, the Buddha says, has 3 urgent duties. The first duty is to plow the soil, to prepare the soil, to dig the soil, turn it over. This is a way to get nutrients into the soil and to prepare soil for the next stage, which is the second urgent duty, planting the seed. So once that seed is planted, the third urgent duty is to irrigate, to water. So this is an image that the Buddha uses, this beautiful image of a field. It's something that we can easily relate to and understand. He says, despite doing all of these duties though, the farmer cannot will for the crop to grow, cannot force that crop to grow. All the farmer can do is put the causes and conditions in place, and over time, eventually, that crop will ripen naturally, all by itself. So this is an allegory. This series of images is an allegory for the stages of the path. The ploughing of the field, preparing, putting the right conditions in, is sila. Or in this case, the Buddha is actually talking about adi sila sikha, the higher training in ethics. This is the fundamental stage that we need to do in our practice. Prepare the field, make sure the conditions are right. This is the basis for our practice. The second stage is planting that seed. This is adi chitta sikha. So this is chitta, the mind, the training in higher mind. And this is meditation. This is the development of the mind that we practice on the path. And the third part, the irrigation, bringing water to that seed so that it can grow. This is adipanya sikha, wisdom, training in higher wisdom. So all of these 3 things are necessary. All of these 3 things work together in order to make the crop grow. So if we want to have wisdom, we need to do some meditation. If you want to do some meditation, we need to prepare the mind with sila. And so it's unfortunate that for some reason, we often skip over this important part of the practice and we go straight into meditation. And of course, we'll get some benefit. Of course, we'll get some good results purely from doing meditation. But the aspect of sila is fundamental. And we should try to work out why the Buddha taught like this. Like, why is it so important? One way we can understand it is to just look at our own lives. How often do you meditate? Is it 15 minutes a day? Maybe for some of us, 15 minutes a week. Maybe we never meditate. So if we're relying purely upon the meditation to purify the mind and develop wisdom, then we have only a slim chance with such a limited practice. However, compare the amount of time that we spend meditating to the amount of time we spend not meditating. All those other activities that we do in our day-to-day life. It's one of these mistakes of our contemporary culture to think that our meditation is completely unrelated to the rest of our life. That we think our spiritual practice is just coming to sit on the cushion for that 15 minutes, that hour of our week. But we disregard quite often the rest of our life, the rest of our actions, our speech, even our thoughts during that non-meditation period, which is always larger than the meditation period. And the purpose of Buddhism and the purpose of the spiritual path is not just to practice meditation, but to become a good person, a better person. This is the practice of ethics. This is the practice of sila. This is why the Buddha taught so frequently and encouraged us to practice precepts. So when I talk to a group like this, I see many people who I know. We're at the Buddhist library where you're listening to a Buddhist monk, but I'm aware that not everyone will be Buddhist. They might not want to use that label for themselves. They may be interested in Buddhist teaching and Buddhist practice, but they may not actually have the label of Buddhist. And they may not actually practice all of the Buddhist teachings. And I understand this, especially when it comes to a field of ethics. There's often a problem in our minds, which is that religion and morality and religious moralizing, dare I say religious hypocrisy, is something that we're very acquainted with. And there's often some reaction in us against maybe a religious authority or a moralizing force, and I understand that. However, these things that I'll be talking about today, the Buddhist ethics that I'll be drawing upon, are not limited to Buddhism, and they're not limited to religion. These are things that we practice in many aspects of society, in secular society. These are just things that protect us and protect others. And so usually when we think about Buddhist ethics, we're very simply just talking about the 5 precepts. Some of you might be familiar with those. Some of you may have never heard it. Some of you might practice some of those. Some of you may practice all of them. And the point is that we have access to a system of ethics. And so today, when you're listening to me talking about ethics, please take on board your own ethical framework. Don't feel, oh, I don't want to listen to that because I don't agree with religious moralizing. Oh, I don't really believe in that precept or this precept. But please bring into your mind your own ethical framework. We all have something. We're all spiritual people who have come along to this talk, who are interested in the spiritual path. So we've all got something that we hold as some sort of conduct that we keep, that suits us, that is something that we can get on board with. So that's the most important thing. But I will just quickly go through the 5 precepts that the Buddha taught. And when I talk about these, I'm going to be careful not to phrase them in such negative terms as we often encounter, like thou shalt not do this or thou shalt not do that, because the point of these precepts is not to condemn or make you feel bad or guilty or force you into certain behaviors. These are more like training rules, and they're useful, and hopefully we can understand why the Buddha taught them and what their purpose and benefit is. So many of you will be familiar with them, but I'll just quickly go through them before we do some meditation. First precept is the precept against killing. So that sounds pretty fair, doesn't it? We all value our own life, and we can understand that many other beings also value their lives too. This precept against killing, it is important to see it in a positive way too. It's not just a you should not kill, but what happens when you don't kill? What happens to your mind? What are the qualities that you develop when you don't kill, when you don't have any desire to harm? So the qualities that come into your mind is a mind of harmlessness. You create an atmosphere of freedom from fear. So when you practice precept of not killing, every living being that you come into contact with can be free of fear from harm. This is a very beautiful mind to develop. And so when we practice precepts in this way, we're not just like, oh, I should not kill. Killing is bad. I'm not going to kill. We should think, I'm developing a mind of love, of harmlessness. I'm developing a mind that creates freedom from fear in all beings that I encounter. This is a very beautiful way to practice. We become almost like a refuge, a sanctuary for other living beings. And this is something that I've seen in my own life. You know, I haven't killed anything with intention for so many years now. I can't remember the last time I deliberately killed something. And so it's possible to practice in this way. And also, when I see a living being, I wouldn't even hurt a fly. Not even a fly. I never kill ants or cockroaches or mosquitoes. And every time I see a being like this, one of these annoying beings coming into my world, I always remember, you're safe here. I'm not going to harm you, even for these small beings. And so this is the way that the mind develops based on training precept of not killing. Second precept is to not steal. We also know how it feels when someone steals from us. I've been robbed before. Maybe some of you have been robbed before. It's a terrible feeling to come home and find everything strewn about and all those precious things that you've collected disappeared. So we understand that it doesn't feel good when those things are taken from us. And we understand that other people don't want those things to be taken from them either. So we can be a trustworthy person, someone that people can trust us to be around. They know that we're not going to steal from them. They know that we're not going to take from them. In this way, we protect our own mind. We don't need to be covetous, have a mind of greed, have a mind of wanting to possess, to take. And in this way, we protect others. They know that we can be trusted. They know that their things are safe. So again, we have this sense of harmlessness and also a sense of comfort and ease. If you steal something, of course, you always get worried that you're going to get caught out, that someone's going to come and the police will come and you'll get in trouble. And so this in itself is a problem, even just the guilt that's attached to theft. The third precept is the precept on sexual misconduct. So please remember that Buddhism doesn't have an attitude towards sex that is anything to do with sin, and that this precept is specifically about cheating on your partner. It's also about consent, those people who can consent. So the precept of sexual misconduct talks about cheating on spouses. It also talks about those who cannot consent, such as children. So this precept is protecting others, but also protecting yourself. You know how it feels in a relationship. You want trust and commitment, loyalty, honesty. Others too want this. And when we've said that we'll be loyal, then we shouldn't cheat. It feels terrible for people to have a person who cheats on them. And also for those people who can't consent, then we don't abuse. So again, this is about safety, about harmlessness. The fourth precept is about lying, that we should not lie. We shouldn't stand up and say, I saw this happen when it didn't, or I didn't see this happen when it did. That we should be truthful and honest. And again, this is important for ourselves. We know that when we lie, it causes all sorts of trouble. What a tangled web we weave. We also know that it hurts others. We know how it feels when we're lied to. We feel betrayed. But it's also something pointing towards what is truth. What does it mean to have truth, to be honest? And this is something that's important when we look very deeply in ourselves. We want to understand the truth. This is something we can see in our internal workings, the lies that we tell ourselves about ourselves. This is also something that we can see when other people look at us. Sometimes we don't want them to see the truth of us. But when it comes to speech, we always try to be honest. People will be able to trust us. They'll think that we're trustworthy. And this is something that will stand us in good stead. Whereas someone who lies and is deceitful has few friends and isn't trusted, and those lies always catch up with them. And the last precept is precept against alcohol and intoxicants. So many people might think, oh, I'm on board with the rest of them, but this one, just can't get on board with. And I'm not about to judge anyone. And I understand why this one seems a little bit slightly different, doesn't it? Because we think, oh, this is my business, this is my concern. It's not really harming anyone, is it? But we do know that alcohol can cause addiction. Alcohol can also cause heedlessness. And most importantly, in the Buddhist path, alcohol is thought to cause a lack of mindfulness and clear comprehension. We know when we look at it objectively that people who are drunk have less mindfulness, and this is why you're not allowed to drive after you've been drinking or operate heavy machinery. And other drugs which are stupefying mean that you can't even be present and aware. And I've seen some YouTube videos of like drunk people falling down the stairs and harming themselves because they've been so drunk. And we also know, unfortunately, that alcohol is linked to things like violence and crime, and especially, unfortunately, domestic violence. So these are the 5 precepts that the Buddha encouraged lay people to keep. And if you look at it, for most of those rules, it's pretty much do unto others as you would want them to do to you. So for most of us, it's something that we can get on board with. So the point of those precepts is not to be better than someone else or to feel morally superior, or even just to practice them in a way which is unthinking, which doesn't really acknowledge the reason for practicing them. For most people who practice the Buddhist path, you may practice these precepts, but never really take on board the fact that you're practicing them. There may just be something that happened way back. You took on these precepts and they're way back in the background there, but they're not something that you reflect upon. They're not something that you utilize in your spiritual practice. You may have those precepts somewhere over there, kind of separate to your meditation and your development of wisdom. You may think, oh, these are the things that I have to do if I want to be a proper Buddhist. I have to take on board these things. But this is a very limited way of using these precepts. The reason for that is that when we look in the world, we see just how messed up it is. We look out on the world and we see so much killing. Every day, people are killing. Even at the moment in Myanmar, the government is shooting protesters. In America, every week it seems there's another mass shooting. Around the world now, there are people killing millions and millions of beings. Even this apartment block where this vihara is, recently the pest inspectors came, or the pest controllers, I don't think it was inspectors, pest controllers came and they killed probably many, many living beings. So this is something that is happening now all around the world. Same with stealing. There's people who are being robbed right now, people who are being mugged on the street, people who are having their precious things taken from them. There's sexual misconduct happening right now out in the world. Only recently, the troubles here in Australia have been exposed, even in places like our national parliament, where there's a culture of sexual misconduct. People are telling lies all over the world. There's fake news. We no longer know what to believe. We can't understand what's going on anymore without doing fact checking. So this is the stage we've gotten to in our culture. And of course, people are lying to each other all the time, everywhere. And of course, there's also people who are intoxicated, who are stumbling home, maybe causing an accident, people who have addiction and substance abuse issues. So this is the world. This is what it's like out there. And so how rare it is for us, for anyone, to consciously take on a spiritual path which develops an ethical framework, which develops something internally within us that we can have as a refuge that allows us to practice to become a better person who looks after our own self, but also looks after others. This is something that's incredibly rare in our world. So many people have heard of Buddhism, so many people have heard of spiritual paths, few people actually practice them. So for someone like us who has an interest in spirituality, an interest in this spiritual path, who has consciously developed an ethical framework as part of their practice, this is something that shouldn't be easily forgotten. This is something that should be celebrated, made much of, developed, because it is for our long-lasting welfare and happiness. And so today, the practice that we're going to be doing for our meditation is Silanussati. Silanussati. So Sila is ethical conduct, and Anussati is the practice of recollection. This is a practice that is not often taught, and probably because, firstly, when we come to practice meditation, we often want to practice the hardcore stuff. We want to do Vipassana, we want to do Satipatthana. But the Buddha taught two different types of meditation. He taught the bhavana bala, the power of development, but he also taught the practice of recollection, power of reflecting, patisanka bala. And this is why we practice things like these reflections, these recollections, because they have a power to them. So these anussatis literally mean to remember again, or to remember along with. There's several different types of anussati practice: the recollection of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, which is something that we often do at the beginning of our Buddhist services, or sometimes Buddhist talks, where we chant the Itipiso, which are recollections of the good qualities of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Another practice, which is a well-known anussati that I often practice and teach, is Chaganussati, the recollection of generosity. And Silanussati is another of those recollections. It's the recollection of our ethical conduct. I'll just say a few more words about the purpose of this meditation, and then we'll do the practice for about 20 minutes or so. When we have good ethical conduct, our mind is also good. It's like a shadow that never leaves us. We have good results that come from good ethical conduct. Ananda, the famous disciple of the Buddha, once asked the Buddha, what is the point of ethical conduct? And the Buddha said, the point of ethical conduct is to develop non-regret. Avipattisaro, non-regret. So when we think about our conduct in speech, our conduct in bodily actions, our conduct in our livelihood, and even our thinking, the way that we live our life conditions our mind. The things we do have an effect. And when we come to sit down in meditation, these are the things that we have to sit with. These are the things that echo through our mind, that have consequences in our mind, that disturb the peace of our meditation. So you see this when you've had a fight with someone, you've yelled at them and screamed at them and maybe told some lies, and then you come to sit down and you're like, oh, why did I say that? How could I have said that to them? How could I hurt that person like that? The practice of precepts is to develop some restraint in our actions. And that restraint prevents us from acting in certain ways. The result of that is that we have less regrets. These regrets, remorse, are things that disturb the peace of the mind, take us away from deep meditation. When the mind is buffeted by these echoes of our actions, we can't get any peace. But when we've been good, and when we know we've been good, we can come down, sit on our cushion, and feel good. And then non-regret appears in the mind. So this is something that is tangible. It's not abstract. It's very much something that can be felt. On the basis of this non-regret, joy arises naturally in the mind. So this is an important stage. Simply having non-regret is already a beautiful mind to have. So many people have so much regret and remorse for their actions. But having a mind that is blameless, that is easy, that isn't disturbed by these things, is in itself a kind of bliss. Yeah. The Buddha used the term anavajja sukha, the bliss of blamelessness that comes from good ethical behavior. So this is happiness. And then when we move from that non-regret to joy, we're deepening positive states in our mind. Non-regret leads to pamuja, joy, gladness. And that gladness, when we develop it, becomes piti, rapture. Rapture is that feeling in the mind and in the body of thrill, excitement. It's the feeling of being showered with beautiful, positive mind states and feelings. And we feel it. It lifts us up. This is called the glue that sticks our mind to the meditation object. Why? Because we're interested. It feels good. We want to be there. It feels nice. And we have some positive experience that makes us want to stay with the meditation. The commentator Buddhaghosa described this as being like someone who is hot and thirsty in a desert, and they see someone coming towards them who's just been bathing, and they say, oh, there's a lovely forest, what is it called in a desert? Oasis. There's a lovely oasis back there with cool water. And you think, oh, I'm hot and sweaty and dirty. I'd love to go for a bathe in a cool oasis. So this is the anticipation. This is the piti. This is what's happening in the meditation. We alight onto this object. And then we walk towards that oasis. Then when we get to the oasis, we enter the water, the cool water that pervades every pore of our skin and makes us feel good. This is the piti starting to mix with the sukha, the happiness, the bliss. And then once we've finished bathing in that cool water, we get out, we lie in the shade, and we feel wonderful, clean, pure, cool. And this is the pure sukha. So in the list that I'm going through, there's another stage in between the piti and the sukha. We can have piti, that rapture, that thrill, that excitement, always comes along with sukha, bliss, pleasure, enjoyment. However, the piti is quite coarse and eventually fades and becomes a much more refined form of pleasure, which is the sukha. And so, although we always have sukha with piti, we don't always have piti with sukha, if that makes sense. And so, let's go back a few stages. Good ethical conduct creates non-regret. Non-regret creates joy. Joy creates piti. And then the piti creates what's called Accāyikasutta, bodily tranquility. This is something that's a really important stage to get to in our meditation practice. This is the stage where the body relaxes, becomes tranquil, feels really good. You might have experienced this in your own practice. I often liken it to the feeling of a tire with the air being let out. It's just everything calms down. You feel so good. It's so delightful to have a body that is tranquil and relaxed. And what's actually happening? The mind is becoming primary. The body, which we usually experience the world through, is fading into the background. Those senses that we usually rely upon fade away from us. We stop paying attention to our sensory experience, and we're starting to experience internal awareness that doesn't rely upon those sense faculties. So the mind is being drawn in, drawn in, drawn in. through increasingly pleasurable states, away from the world outside towards an internal awareness. So this bodily tranquility then produces a deep sukha, a deep pleasurable experience, bliss. This is the stage of meditation which unfortunately many people don't get to. And it's a stage of meditation that once you've experienced it, makes you understand why people bother to meditate. If you haven't ever experienced pleasurable states in your meditation, it will always be a struggle to get onto the seat to meditate. It will always be a bit of a hard job to get to. Because when we don't have pleasurable meditation experiences, it means that the mind isn't inclined towards meditation. So the Buddha always taught this pleasurable path of meditation. And this pleasure is what draws the mind in deeper and deeper. And this is what brings us to the next stage, which is samadhi. Samadhi, stillness, deep meditation. And from samadhi, we start to develop wisdom. We see clearly what's going on. Stillness of samadhi has provided enough clarity in the mind that we can see clearly. We're no longer buffeted by the world outside. We're no longer obsessed by our sensory experience. The mind is happy to stay with this internal meditation object. And so we see clearly, this is a stage called jnana dassana. Yatha bhuta jnana dassana, seeing clearly, yatha bhuta, seeing things as they are. So when we see this clearly, this is where we start to develop the wisdom faculty. We see what's going on. We start to understand. Based on that, we develop higher stages of the path, which I'll go over very briefly. This includes nibbida, disillusion, turning away. After that comes viraga, disenchantment, dispassion, no longer wanting to get involved. And this becomes freedom, escape. And of course, this freedom, this escape, this is happiness. This is the highest happiness. Nibbana is the highest happiness. Being free from this conditioned experience is the highest happiness. And so the purpose and benefit of our practice can be seen. The purpose and benefit of developing all of these mind states goes back all the way to the beginning, to developing strong ethical conduct. And so when we practice ethical conduct, we get the non-regret, the piti, the joy, all of these things come in line. And this is why the Buddha recommended the importance of ethics as part of our practice. And in this way, we start to integrate the practice of meditation with the experience of our life, with the way we behave in our non-meditation, in the main part of our life, in our daily experience. So this is why we practice in this way. Developing this joy in the heart, in the mind, this is what propels us deeper into meditation. This is what makes us want to meditate. And this is how we move from being sad to glad. So I don't know if, just looking at the time, I think it's probably a good opportunity to ask some questions. If anyone has any questions about the topic of either Silanussati as a practice, or the idea of ethics and how we can use them in our spiritual practice, or what their purpose is, or any tricky questions they want to ask, then feel free to either put a message in the chat or to raise your hand, and Bronwyn will call upon people to unmute themselves, and we can have a bit more discussion.
Teresa, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Bronwyn. Thank you, Bhante. This question, forgive me if it's not directly on point, but it does have to do with what you've just mentioned. I'm not very familiar with the jhana stages, but it seemed like when you were talking about joy and piti and sukha, you were describing jhana stages. My question is that if that is correct, I've also heard people talk about the dark night, or on retreat, they call it the roll up the mat stage. Like, you know, they just sort of want to give up. Is that part of the jhana stages, or is that a completely different mixed up, or is there such a stage as that in the jhana stages?
So in answer to your first question, these are not describing jhana stages. The pathway that I kind of outlined is just a very general sequence that appears many, many, many times in the suttas. And what this pathway outlines is the importance of causes and conditions. So the image that I used at the beginning of the talk of the soil, the seed, the irrigation, this is about putting in the right causes and conditions so that you get a ripening. So the first point can be many different things. So that first point could be something like Buddhanussati, recollecting the Buddha. It could be recollecting spiritual friendship, could be a practice of generosity. It's anything that is wholesome and good that creates joy in the mind. And so this is just a sequence of events that happen when we are connected with something that's wholesome. And that joy develops and becomes deeper and deeper. And those are you heard some of the factors of jhana that I meant, that I mentioned in that sequence. But these are factors, they're not the actual jhanas. These are something that will be present when the jhana occurs, but they're not in themselves jhana. So when these factors come together really, really strongly, that's when jhana happens, when there's an incredible stillness in the mind. That's when proper samadhi is reached, sama samadhi, that is jhana. But these jhana factors, such as sukha, tranquility, and piti, these things develop outside of jhana also. So when we're developing these mind states, we're actually encouraging those beautiful, positive, blissful, wholesome states, which will lead to jhana when all of the other factors are in place. And so no, they're not the same thing as jhana. And the second part of your question is about the dark night of the soul. And this is essentially some sort of spiritual crisis. And a lot of people talk about this. I think one thing that happens is if we've ever been on a retreat, we'll come up at some stage against the habit pattern of the mind, or we'll uncover something that's really uncomfortable, and we'll see something that maybe creates fear or discomfort or makes us disturbed. And this, if it's not handled correctly in a safe and wholesome way, can become very destabilizing. So one of the problems with the way that we do contemporary meditation is that we emphasize this idea of the meditation retreat, which is this really intensive practice that we put ourselves through. And we've got centers set up specifically to hothouse our meditation practice. And so it's like a hothouse in that it's an artificial environment. And it's a bit of a pressure cooker, especially some retreats where you go from like a really busy world, really busy daily activity, and then maybe not practicing meditation at all, and then bang, waking up at 4 a.m. doing 14 hours of meditation a day, which can be quite intense. And you might think that you're getting really, really deep, and perhaps you are getting some benefit and some depth, but it's not stable and it's not steady. It's brittle and fragile, and it can fall apart at any moment. And so for some people, it can fall apart in quite spectacular ways. Some people, maybe they have some pre-existing mental health condition. They might become unwell. Some people who have anxiety or depression, by focusing on that intensively during a meditation retreat, can become unwell. Some people can become a bit obsessive compulsive. And other people become very competitive. They really become spiritual materialists. They really want to attain something, get something, which is, of course, the opposite of the spiritual path. And so I'm sometimes a little bit wary of people without much experience going into intensive meditation retreats. And I think the best way to prepare and to avoid these kind of really dark moments is to have a meditation practice which is based in our ordinary life, and that is gentle and that becomes more solid and more steady over time, so that we're already familiar with the practice and the process of meditation. We're developing our good qualities. We're developing good ethical conduct. We're well mentally, we're healthy. And then when we go on retreat, that's a time for us to kind of just enjoy the benefits. We don't have to push, we don't have to struggle. Sure, there'll be some difficult times. Sure, there'll be some complicated emotions and memories that come up, but hopefully we'll be in a much better place to deal with it. And so, yeah, I'm not really in favor of really pressure cooker environments. I'm much more of the kind of Ajahn Brahm, relax, don't stress out. The best results in meditation come from letting go and not from grasping too tightly. And I think sometimes when people have those dark nights of the soul, they're really wanting some sort of peak meditation experience or some profound drop of wisdom to be squeezed out, or that they have to get to some sort of stage of meditation. And all of these things just push you away from peace and stillness. So, yeah. Sorry, long answer to your question. I hope it was somehow helpful. I think there's a question from, oh gosh, I don't have my glasses on. I think it's Afwan.
Good evening, Bhante.
Yes.
Good evening, Bhante.
Good evening.
My question was about Patimokkha. I'm really curious and fascinated by Patimokkha. So I'm curious. I'm just curious. Before you become ordained, you observe the 5 precepts or 8 precepts or 10 precepts. But when you become fully ordained, does it really affect your mind state when you meditate? Can you speak from your personal experience?
It does.
Thank you.
And thanks for bringing that up, because what she was pointing to is that the Adi Sila Sika, which is the higher training in virtue, is actually directed towards the Bhikkhu Sangha and Bhikkhuni Sangha. So we have many, many more rules to follow. Most of these are actually protections for us. So they're not terribly burdensome for us to maintain. Some of them are ancient and old-fashioned and weird. And some of them are seemingly simple but difficult to follow. For example, what's one thing, a rule that maybe is often broken in many monasteries might be the protection of plant life. So, you know, we might say, oh, that tree needs to come down because it's, you know, going to fall down, we might have to damage a tree, or we might have to prune some plants, or we might have to cut some grass. And so these are some things that are in the Paṭhamamahānāmasutta rules. And so if we break a rule, then we have a way of dealing with it. And I'm just trying to remember back to the beginning of the practice. I think what I usually do, and I don't think I did it this time with this group, was to encourage you to forgive yourself for those times where you haven't followed your ethical conduct, where you haven't followed your precept. Because this is something which we can do in line with keeping our precepts. If we break a precept, it's okay. You're not a terrible person. You're not evil. Doesn't mean you're going straight to hell. This is a training rule. It's something we use to increase our good qualities. So you don't want to just stomp on yourself and beat yourself up and flagellate yourself about something. You want to understand why these rules exist, that they're a protection for us, that they restrain us from unwholesome conduct. And so the important thing to do is to recognize when we've made a mistake, when we've broken a rule. If we recognize this, then we can bring up some strong regret and a determination to not do it again. And this is what we do at the Paṭimokkha. The monks will come together, and before we begin the recital of the rules, we do what's called confession. And we go to another monk and we confess any of the rules that we've broken. And the other monk says, do you see? This is all in Pali. Do you see? And they're saying, do you see the drawbacks? Do you see the problem? Do you see what's happened? And you say, Bhante, yes, I see. Then in the future, you should be more restrained, is the reply. And so this is what we practice. If we break a rule, we have regret in our mind, remorse in our mind. And so we confess it, we acknowledge it in the presence of another, and then we ask for, we don't ask for forgiveness, but we allow ourselves to be forgiven. We forgive ourselves. And we make this strong determination to try not to do it in the future. So this is important because you might think, oh, I broke my rule, then that's it. Over. No more Buddhism for me. Or I break one rule, I throw them all out. May as well, in for a penny, in for a pound. But no, actually, we always have the opportunity to develop and grow. We always have the opportunity to improve ourselves. And there's terrible people at the time of the Buddha who did terrible things. Angulimala, who went around killing people and wearing their fingers as a necklace, and people who did horrible, horrible things to other people that were able to turn their life around and able to acknowledge that what they did was wrong and to transform their mind. So this is something that we can all do at any time of our life. And I think that There's some problems with some aspects of our culture at the moment where we punish people for their past deeds, even if it was a long time later. It's important that their problematic behaviour is acknowledged and the hurt that they cause is acknowledged. But we shouldn't condemn them forever to that moment. We shouldn't keep them small and stuck back there in the past, because our capacity for change is what allows us to develop on the spiritual path. So it's really important in ourselves and in others that if we've done something unethical, done something that harms others or hurts others, that it is acknowledged and that there is a strong desire to avoid harming again. And when that is present, there's the possibility for change to occur. But when people refuse to acknowledge the harm that they've done, refuse to acknowledge inappropriate or unethical behaviour, and they lie and they cover up, they become deceitful and they deflect and say it's their fault or this, whatever, then that person hasn't seen their behaviour, hasn't seen the consequences of their behaviour, and it's much more difficult for them to change because they're not willing to admit to themselves that they've done something. And until people are willing to see that our actions have consequences, then we're only thinking about ourselves. We're not thinking about other people. We're only thinking about our ego and protecting it. We're not thinking about acknowledging others' hurt. And so we're a smaller ethical being. It's when we can recognize that our behavior impacts others and that we care that it impacts others, that we move from a selfish place to a much more expansive place where we acknowledge that what we do affects others and we want to protect ourselves as well as others. And this is what is a good action. An action that only benefits us but doesn't benefit others, or only benefits others and doesn't benefit us, isn't half as good as an action that benefits both parties. So, sorry, another long answer. I hope that I made it clear. But yeah, I do feel that the restraint of the Patimokkha Code does protect me from doing actions that might otherwise cause regret to appear in my mind. And I think taken as a whole, it's really about living well as we can. And I think that's something that we can all do regardless of being ordained or not.